How did your passion start?
The passion for cars, I guess, or automobiles. As far as I can remember, I've been totally fascinated by cars. And people ask me, when did it start and so on, as you just did. And my earliest memory was when I was at the cinema with my father, and we saw a Norwegian stop-motion puppet movie from 1976. In English called Pinchcliffe Grand Prix. So it's about this bicycle repairman who lives on a Norwegian mountaintop, and he creates this incredible car racing machine with a 10-liter engine in the front, a rocket engine in the rear, and goes to race in a Le Mans type of race and wins against Porsche, Ferrari, these kind of famous brands back in the days, Lola maybe. And I was totally fascinated. And of course this was a puppet movie, but it's very well made. It's still exciting to watch actually today. My father told me when we walked out of the cinema that I said, that's what I want to do when I grow up. I want to be like that bicycle repairman to create that incredible car and compete on the world scene or in racing or something. And I started drawing cars after that and buying car magazines for all my pocket money. I had in my boy room had stacks of car magazines everywhere. And I remember reading them not very, very closely, looking at the pictures and the text, trying to understand why is that lamp different than that car's lamp? Why is that mirror different than this one? Which one do I prefer? Trying to understand why cars were different and creating my own vision for what my car should be, like some kind of hobby education from 6-7 years old. And I did that through my teenage years. Well, I didn't have access to work on cars, so I started tuning mopeds and playing with small power boats and radio controlled things, and but always with the idea of one day building my own car. And I started my first company when I was 19 years old. The idea of the company was I want to make some money so I can build a car. So it was a trading company. I thought I can buy and sell things and make money. And I did that for 3-4 years. It was relatively successful. And in 1994, I said, okay, I've proven to myself I can start a company and make money, but it's really cars I want to do. And I take this little money I have and I will start. And I was 22 years old and it was in 1994. And 2 years later, I managed to create the first prototype that was driving, and one thing led to another, and here we are today.
What was your favorite car as a young boy?
So I think I had the Lamborghini Countach as a poster on my wall. I liked the Lotus Esprit. I guess 70s and 80s mid-engine sports cars in general. I'm from that era, so I was not into cars from the 30s, 40s, or 50s. Maybe a little bit the 60s. More now than then. I maybe like older cars like 60s and 50s and so on. But at the time it was what was surrounding me, of course, and that was the inspiration. I still have a big passion for that era of cars.
What influence did you have while designing your first car?
I remember actually in 1994 reading about the release of the McLaren F1, and it kind of blew my mind in the sense that it was very different to all the other supercars out there. It had that lightweight ethos that I liked, and the kind of simplification and straightforwardness, even though it had 3 seats, of course. It was kind of simple, straightforward, quite small and light and very lightweight and super high performance. That was really a big inspiration, I would say. Also the F40, same reason, very lightweight, very straightforward, quite simplistic, super performance. So I think those were the 2 cars that really were in the back of my mind. Also, I had a weak spot for and this was, of course, end of the 60s and so on, but the Ford GT, kind of this little bit wraparound screen of a car, also very compact, simple, powerful.
Tell me something about the first prototypes, some stories.
Yeah, so the first car had a Audi V8 engine and a Audi transmission. The rest was very much special made. And the reason why we chose that was we had an idea that eventually maybe we can work with Audi and be allowed to tune these engines, and it's a good basis, but that didn't materialize. But that's what we had in the first car. The chassis was more of a welded construction, but with some box elements like a carbon monocoque, but in steel, but with a carbon fiber floor. We very early on started simulating our own. We actually made our own simulation programs for handling. This was before really it existed in the marketplace, at least that you could buy. So a friend of mine he's still working together with me now, but he was a computer programmer, so he could make a simulation program where we put in a lot of geometries from different cars and compared and so on. So the first prototype, even though it was very, very rough, it still handled really good. It has been the building block for whatever we have been doing since. And then we had the idea of when the Audi engine deal did not work out, we looked for other solutions, and we actually ended up with an Italian engine for a while, a 12-cylinder boxer engine. But the company developing that unfortunately stopped its operations, so that was not a viable solution anymore. And then we started developing our own engines, a little bit out of desperation because we couldn't find anything. So we started developing our own engines from Ford blocks, but made everything else very special. Connecting rods, pistons, crankshafts, really modified cylinder heads, and our own engine controllers. And for the CCX model and forward from 2006, everything is very much our own construction, which is something I would not have dared to dream about when I began, that we would be able to make our own engines. And now they are not only our own engines, they're worldwide homologated with the most power output per liter of any production engine in the world, in combination with the most extreme electrification and our own transmission systems, all the way from the Koenigsegg direct drive with no gears and electrification to the new Jesko, where we have a patented new transmission which is very compact, only 90 kilos with 9 gears that can shift super fast from any gear to any gear, which is kind of the next step beyond DCT technology. So we have really gone from a kid with a dream of building sports cars to become also a technology company where all the electronics, controllers, software, engines, transmissions, electrification, all is really developed in-house with our own unique technology to make the car as cohesive and efficient and with as much personality as possible.
Tell me something about the camless system.
Yes, so it's a technology we've been working on in a sister company, which is actually behind us here, Freevalve, in this room. We've been working on it for 20 years. It has been a big challenge, but we never stopped developing it because it gives enormous freedom to the combustion engine. A camshaft really limits, especially if you have several cylinders and you want to have a varying RPM and power and torque level. A camshaft on a multi-cylinder limits the cylinders to behave differently, and you can only vary to a certain degree the valve motion per revolution, while Freevalve completely disconnects each valve from the rest of the engine operation, and you can open them a little bit or a lot and hold them open. They don't need to be on a cam shape. They can actually stay open like you have a square camshaft profile, and completely individually. So it means you can shut down cylinders. You don't need any throttle bodies because you can throttle with the valves directly in the combustion chamber. From one revolution to the next, you can go from lowest power to highest power. You can have separated exhaust channels for each valve, so you can have several stage turbo effects or different catalytic converter solutions. It just opens up a completely new realm of opportunity that is so advanced that we are now taking the help of AI to fully understand the capability of the system. Humans, we can only make it run nice and improve on the camshaft, but an AI can actually play around much quicker with different ways of operating these valves. So it comes up with completely new combustion cycles that are ever changing depending on RPM and load and torque. We see it a little bit like if you have a piano and you can play many different music styles, but the camshaft was like holding a broom stick and only playing all the keys like this. Freevalve makes it possible to play the piano like this and with many different melodies.
So, how do you see hypercars in the future?
So of course electrification is a very big thing right now. What is exciting about electrification is, well, of course, the environmental aspect. There are no local emissions at least, and if you run on solar or wind or water stream power, you can be extremely clean. The other aspect which is exciting is the responsiveness of electrical motors. It's, in a sports car especially, it's very exciting to have that synaptic connection between your brain, foot and the wheel with no delay, no shifting, no gasping, no turbo spool up. When you think about overtaking, it happens immediately. What is not so exciting is the weight and maybe the sound. And for some people also maybe shifting. So there are these kind of downsides. And another downside is, of course, if you have a big battery pack to have a lot of power and range, it's not like a combustion engine car where you become lighter and lighter the less energy you have. You stay as heavy all the way until empty, so you don't have that benefit of consuming less. On the other hand, an electric drivetrain is very efficient normally. From a Koenigsegg perspective, as we have the free valve technology, as we have super extreme combustion engine technology, which have been running on renewable fuels for the last 10 years, as we have flex fuel capability on our engines. You can run on E85 and actually E100 in Brazil even. And we were the first ones in the world to introduce 800 volt technology to the market 1.5 years before Porsche, who claims to be the first. But we were actually the first as a homologated series produced car with the Regera. As we have all these technologies, we can easily make a fully electric car with the technology we have, or just a combustion engine car. But we see the truth for or the best solution for the meantime somewhere in between, where the combustion engine can make the car lighter, because you can have a much smaller battery pack for the electrified part of it, and you get the sound. And if you run on renewable fuel, it can many times be more environmentally friendly and emit less CO2 than a pure electric car if it's not fueled up with the right electricity. And normally, at least on average, an electric car is fueled up on a mix of coal and gas and nuclear and solar. And if you take that into consideration, for sure a car running on next generation 2.0 ethanol and with no petrol mix-in, which is possible with free valve even in cold climates, and then with regeneration from the electrified side with a very small battery pack, you get a car that has the sound, much less weight, longer range, and the kick of electric propulsion and the regeneration of electric propulsion, which is very important also for energy efficiency. So for the near future, that is our aim, to mix the two into the most competitive mix from a range, power, sound, emission, performance perspective.
Which of your cars, past cars, made you more happy?
This is a very difficult question. For sure, it was an euphoric moment to drive the absolute first Koenigsegg ever, and I drove it with even no bodywork on it. It was like a huge go-kart with a 500 horsepower V8. And I think with no bodywork, it was a very light, simple car, so I think the thing maybe weighed 500 kilos or something. So that was super exciting. And you got all the wind in your face, and that was an incredible experience. Then it starts to get more difficult because, of course, the first CC8S, which had the world record for being the most powerful production car in the world with 655 horsepower, according to Guinness in 2002. It was immensely powerful. It was supercharged, so you had a super good response, and it was manual, and it weighed under 1,200 kilos. That is still an amazing drive today. It's just very pure and emotional. The big aha moment after that was probably the 1-to-1, where we managed to get, again, I would say, as for my first drive, I had 500 kilos, 500 horsepower, no bodywork. We managed to have 1 horsepower per kilo, and we spent thousands of hours in our first supercomputer for CFD that we have in the basement to create massive amounts of downforce. And Michelin, that we've been working with since the beginning, they developed a version of their cup tire for this car, and the handling and sensation of driving that car and the lightness and responsiveness, it's so much more than just a power number. It's an agile, compact, quite small, super high performing, super high downforce, super responsive car, which also happens to have a lot of horsepower. Then the Regera, again, a completely different experience. It is really the first, let's say, Koenigsegg with a GT focus. So it's the first Koenigsegg where we have the engine not solidly mounted to the carbon monocoque like a pure racing car. We have now active engine mounts, and on top of that we have the smoothest transmission in any car, even compared to a Rolls-Royce, because it is this direct drive with torque conversion and electrification. And electrification you can make extremely smooth and responsive. A torque converter is smooth in its nature. And the V8, in that case, with a 90-degree crankshaft, is extremely smooth. So you have this smooth monster suddenly. It's quite quiet in the car. You don't have all the mechanical sounds that we're used to in a Koenigsegg, but you have 2,000 Newton meters of torque and 1,600 horsepower, like this. So it's a strange experience. You feel completely relaxed, and then you do this, and then you're off in a rocket ship immediately with a big roar. So that is a different experience, which is as exciting. And what we're surprised about is we did not focus on maximum downforce here or maximum suspension stiffness. It was more of the ultimate GT expression, acceleration, power, comfort. But the car is so well balanced with the weight so low down and very close to 50-50 weight distribution that it is actually an amazing car on the track. And we think this year we will prove some lap records with our GT car that probably will beat some much more track-focused cars around tracks. And that's something we didn't really expect it could do, but we think it can do that. So we will play around a little bit with that. And now we have the Jesko, of course, which is basically, I would say, the next generation of the 1-to-1, where we have from a 5-liter combustion engine, 1,600 horsepower, 2,000 Newton meters of torque, very smooth drivability with a super usable 9-speed, 6 wet clutch transmission. Again, for being a shifting transmission, it's extremely friendly and smooth, but super fast. And here we have combined kind of the technologies between the Regera and the 1-to-1 to make it a little bit more daily friendly and quiet than the 1-to-1. Still lighter, as the transmission is lighter and the engine is lighter. And it's our next generation V8 with 180-degree crankshaft, which is the lightest V8 crankshaft ever in production. And again, the world's most powerful engine in comparisons to its volume, and worldwide homologated. And we're making 2 versions of this car, one very track focused with over 1,000 kilo of downforce, a lot of active aerodynamics, and then a high-speed version which is more road oriented, a little bit more soft sprung and super slippery. And that's where we are today. This is a 2008 CCXR. That was designed in 1999, and this is 2006 design. And of course you can see the similarities, but it's actually a little bit bigger car. It's a bit longer, it's a bit taller. It was the first version that we had US homologation, so the bumpers are different, and yeah, underneath there's a big difference. And this model range was the first where we had our complete engine that we designed from scratch.